Line's good.
Never on.
Whoa.
Hard. Hardly.
Come on, Brent.
Line's good.
Got real close.
I hear high, right?
Try and hit 2/3.
Have they saved it for her? Yes, they have.
Ooh, welcome to Game of Stones, everybody. I am Sean Graham Scott, physically distancing, as he always does. Hello, Scott.
Hey, Sean. Yeah, I always physically distance myself from everybody at all times possible because I like being alone.
So really, this pandemic, on a personal note, in terms of your social life, hasn't really been that problematic.
Not too bad. Not too bad. Of course, I don't mean to minimize it. It's hard. It's hard being at home, but at the same time, I don't have kids. So, silver linings.
Yeah, certainly the discussion over schools and stuff, it's raging here in Ontario, and I know it is across the country as we start to look forward to the potential of kids going back to school, which I believe will have a very real impact on whether or not curling clubs open, not strictly if kids are back at school or not, just whether or not there's any ramifications pandemic-wise on schools. And just as long as that plays out safely, and of course we all hope it does, with whatever the plan is across the country or the various plans across the country, that if it goes well, maybe that's a better sign for the curling season.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, so, but it does lead into our topic today that we want to talk about. And Scott, we've been kind of guest heavy over the summer, and we figured why not keep that going, because we had a great guest for today's episode. We were very lucky to talk with Chad McMullen, who is the founder of the Rocks and Rings program. And if you've ever watched a Scotties or a Brier game, you know what Rocks and Rings are because the commercials run every end.
Yeah, a great program to get young people involved in curling at a level where the investment isn't, going to a curling club and sliding on ice and stuff. Sort of to get the game into the minds of young kids as, oh, this is a thing, right? Also, we've been talking about diversity here over the last couple months, and this Rocks and Rings program keeps coming up as a way to introduce the game to new Canadians, to people who wouldn't normally have access to a curling club. And that's sort of part of the mission of the Rocks and Rings program. And we wanted to talk about that, talk about where it's been and where it's going.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. Here's our discussion with Chad McMullen. All right, and Chad McMullen joins us now. Chad, how are you today?
Doing very well. How about you guys?
Doing pretty good, thanks. We really appreciate you joining us to discuss the program and your involvement in it. So let's go back to the beginning. And what was the impetus behind the Rocks and Rings program, and what made you want to get involved?
Well, you know what? It all started in, was it 2009? Yeah, last year we celebrated our 10th anniversary. But yeah, I think there was a bit of a hole in the whole system in terms of development, and so basically back then I took the concept to both Capital One, who were a big curling sponsor at the time, and also to Curling Canada, or Canadian Curling Association at the time. And you know what, we wanted to be able to reach out with the sport instead of waiting for kids to come to us. Another big factor in the whole thing was that, we really recognized that the demographic at curling clubs did not match the demographic makeup of Canada. And so this was a way, by going to the schools, by taking the sport to the kids, and like I said, instead of the other way around, that we could potentially fix that a little bit.
But how do you get to the point where it's I really do want to talk about the demographic stuff as well, but how do you get to the point from, obviously curling is an ice sport. So I'm curious about when you approach Curling Canada or Capital One and you say, we want to take this to the schools, what is their reaction? Or is there an immediate thought of, well, this is an ice sport and schools don't have ice?
Yeah, I mean, that was obviously a major hurdle was showing them how it could be done. And I mean, thankfully, I had years and years of experience within the sport and with these people already leading up to that. So it wasn't just a cold call, someone coming out of the blue. I think they recognized that I understood this space and that we were onto something here, and big credit to Ian Cunningham, who was at Capital One at the time, and they had a very TV heavy sponsorship, and he saw the benefit of getting involved in something that was more community give back and basically to activate the whole thing. They were big supporters as well of just getting kids physically active, which we designed the program around that as well.
Right. So let's talk about how this sport then gets adapted, or how the program gets adapted to kids. I think most curling fans will be familiar with the commercials, and we see Caitlin Laws and others in the ads when they're going to schools. But how did you come up with the programming? Whether it's we see kids running with brooms and the hurry hard and basically floor curling as well. Like what was that process like in transforming and creating the equipment that would be used in the schools?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, it was 10, 11 years ago now, and I'm trying to remember that there was a lot of involvement with teachers. I relied on friends of mine that were teachers just to help with the programming, how we could match it up to the curriculum. The concept was only going to work if the schools actually accepted us and wanted this. And obviously there were a lot of mistakes made and changes that had to be made to make it work. But you know what, we kind of hashed that all out in a bunch of different pilots and tests. And even some teacher friends were good enough to allow us to get into those schools just to test it. And from there we created and found some equipment that could best replicate curling, or as best we could without ice. And then we also had to make it more active too, because we didn't want it to just be about kids sitting on the ground and sliding stones. So we had to build out the rest of it, and that's where the brooms come in and the fun drills and relays that they do.
How much of it is teaching the sport itself and giving sort of a background on what the sport is versus that activity based and something that teachers can use within, whether it's phys ed classes or just sort of a break from the normal curriculum? Like, where's that balance between the sport versus the in-class activity?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. The key to the success of this program is that it's all about fun and it's an introduction. And it is not, we do not get technical. I mean, the instructors, they do talk a little bit about the sport and what it's about, of course, but we don't get into technical stuff. Like, we don't get into sliding. We don't get into, detailed rules of the game or anything like that. And we've actually learned over the years that can hinder things. We want the kids to have fun. We want them to walk out of there saying curling was awesome, and to go home to mom and dad and say, I want to go to the local rink and try this on ice now. So we've actually even had issues where, someone wants to come in, someone that knows curling maybe, and wants to teach them a little more, teach them more technical stuff. And in all honesty, it's just not as fun for kids of that age. So that's the key. It's introduction, fun, and of course activity. I mean, it's, they yell and scream the whole time during the thing because they're having so much fun, and we get a lot of feedback from teachers saying this is a lot more fun than they've had in the gym class in a long time.
Which is a great sign, and of course we are very excited when people get into curling. So you mentioned earlier the demographics of this, and this is something that we've talked about on the show now for a while, and something that I've been interested in for a long time is the demographics of curling. And my position that we've talked about on the show before is that when I turn on a Scotties or a Brier, it doesn't look like the country that I live in every day when I go walk around Ottawa. So what is the strategy, or what has the strategy been in finding communities that don't typically participate in curling and are not active in their local curling clubs?
Yeah, I mean, we take the program pretty much anywhere in Canada. I mean, we've delivered even in all of the territories. It's accessible at any time, at almost any time in almost any location. So we don't on a daily basis target specific areas. We're more just, we're out there for everyone, but we have done a lot of one-off pilots and projects, and some of them have been supported by Curling Canada, and some have been other local groups, where we actually have gone into First Nations areas, or we've gone to places in the territories that are fly-in access only. So we do a lot of those things as well, but the idea with Rocks and Rings is more of a long-term, general, countrywide approach, where just by going into the schools themselves, we are going to reach everyone as much as possible.
Have you, or do you have a sense of what the buy-through rate is, if there is one, of kids or families who have gone to clubs? Like, is that something that the program keeps track of what the uptake is?
You know what, we would love to. For years, people would ask us, okay, well, what's next? How do we get them onto the ice now? And so we know the program has short-term success and long-term success. I mean, long-term, we're really seeing it now over 10 years. People are more and more talking about that this is how they got involved, was through Rocks and Rings. Even adults saying the kids had Rocks and Rings, and then the adults tagged along, and suddenly they're curling too. So we know that's happening. The short-term success, though, is hard to measure, simply because we have no way of knowing. We have no way of knowing if a kid had the program and then went into their local club, because, well, A, they might not tell the club this is why they're there, and B, we don't deal directly with clubs. There are just far too many of them for us to deal with them individually. So, the manager, even if they did know they came because of Rocks and Rings, they don't really have any impetus to tell us or reason to get back to us. So it's really difficult. Of course, we do get all the stories from various places all over the place that yes, that this is why they did it, but we can't actually record it or track it 100% accurately. But over the years, though, we did create the Curling 101 program, which with Curling Canada, which uses the Rocks and Rings program as basically the marketing tool to get people on ice. So we would target specific curling clubs. We would run Rocks and Rings programs in their area, specifically in the 4 to 10 days out period for a specific open house, and with all the marketing, and so the kids would show up to those with the parents, and those had a really, really high success rate and even higher conversion rate. I think our conversion rate of the kids that actually got to the clubs, the conversion rate was, I believe, just over 20%. Wow. On average over the 4 years. Yeah, I mean, it's insane. I think any sport would be ecstatic with, a 5% conversion rate of people that were trying the sport for the first time. So
yeah, well, you think of like around Christmas, when I know, at least in Ottawa here, a lot of offices do Christmas parties at curling clubs, mm-hmm. and the buy-through rate at that, I would suggest, just anecdotally, is maybe 1%.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're fantastic. They do a great job. I mean, they bring in revenue for the club regardless if anyone signs up. But yeah, you're right. It's probably a low number. I mean, that's just the reality for sport in general. I mean, a lot of the people that are there don't even want to be there. They're forced to be there for work. So you're never going to capture those. So already you're down to smaller numbers. But yeah, no, and you know what, the Curling 101 program, the second part of it was the actual on ice instruction that we taught and that we provided to the clubs to deliver. And part of signing up was that they had to agree to deliver that specific program that had been tried and tested over the years. We didn't want them to bring in their level 3 coach for, brand new beginners and teach them technical stuff. That, again, just like Rocks and Rings, this was based on fun. It was only 60 minutes where, people had to get their heads, or clubs had to get their heads around this. Is, we're not doing things the traditional way here. We don't want people out on the ice for 2 hours for their first ever attempt at curling, because they're going to have a great time, but then they're going to get cold, they're going to get bored, and they're going to leave on a low. So right. We designed this whole program for just fun, quick game, leave after 60 minutes on a high, and you want to come back for more.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me too, there's that Curling Canada commercial where it's like, here's the basics of curling, and it's like a 4-minute video, and at the end it goes, so that plus a few dozen other things, and that's how you curl, right? But it's the idea of just here are sort of the basics, and go have fun with it. Like, we don't need to get too serious with it with beginners, right? We want everyone to come, try it out, have a good time.
Yeah, and I mean the game is so old. There's so much tradition to it here in Canada that it's just too entrenched in our clubs, and I think we're trying to bring a new approach that is, it's all about the sport, but it's also heavily focused on marketing and how to market and what people are looking for, and what people are looking for today is a hell of a lot different than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
Very true. And I think, I know Scott and I, like, our experience is that we started because our parents were at the club, and a lot of people our generation, that's the experience, that our parents would curl, and then we started to curl, and then we continued with it. What I like about this program, and Scott, I'm curious to know what you think about this too, is the idea that is basically flipping that. The traditionally parents would bring their kids, but now we have a program here where part of the intent is that the kids can bring their parents.
Yeah. And bringing the parents fills a nice void in that, at most curling clubs, they all recognize that they need junior curlers, they need youth curlers because this is the future. But at the same time, it's not instant revenue because these kids, their fees are usually very, very low, and they're probably losing money to turn the lights on for a junior program. But by bringing the parents, now suddenly some of the parents see it, and then boom, you've got some instant members right there that are going to contribute to full membership prices and to the bar and things like that. So it's a nice benefit that we've worked in there.
Yeah. Or even just having the bar open during the junior program. If the parent doesn't want to get on the ice at least right away, they can hang out with the other parents while the program's going on, maybe have a drink, relax, and it turns into a social event for them just as much as it could be for the kid.
We have heard that comment so many times where we've seen parents have signed the kids up even though they have no interest in curling, but they've signed them up because they've come back to us and said, I could be freezing my butt off at a outdoor hockey rink at 6 a.m. on a Saturday, or I can be here at 10 o'clock having a drink and watching them behind the glass in this nice warm room. So we hear that all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
Chad, I wanted to I wanted to ask if you see sort of a more of a demand for the program around large curling events such as the Olympics, and sort of what is the ebb and flow of the demand for the program in a 4-year cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from year one, we have been on a steady trajectory upwards, but there is always a spike in the Olympic years. And so it might dip a little bit down the next year, but then it slowly comes back up and peaks even higher the next after the next quadrennial is over. So it's been fantastic. And I mean, teachers are just, they're adding winter Olympic programming to their classrooms. So there's just more and more of them that are looking for it. They know it's going to be on TV a ton coming up. So those the February sessions in a year will book up faster than the other sections because the teachers know that curling's on TV. Unfortunately this past year we were actually on pace to break our own record, which I think is around 225,000 kids in a year. And we were on pace to break that this last year, even though it wasn't an Olympic year, until COVID shut things down there near the end.
Wow.
Yeah, so I would assume that that the busiest time for the program and when it's run the most is that basically the TSN Season of Champions, I would assume. Is that sort of January through April period?
Yeah, exactly. It starts a little slow in September as people are settling in, and then you start to increase, and then of course drops a little in December for Christmas holidays, and then it really starts to ramp up in January, February, and then it just kind of keeps that momentum. And I mean, we can only book so many schools in those exact months, so the rest of them, they end up doing it later. So we end up going right through into June in most school districts across the country.
Wow, that's pretty good to get it all the way to the warm weather and still have people interested.
Mm. Yeah, well, and I mean, and it doesn't stop there. I mean, once school stops, we do a lot of summer camp bookings in. Now that one's not cross country, but in most of the bigger cities, we do summer camps all summer long too.
Oh wow. I'm curious to ask you too, in your experience as someone who's in this program in Curling 101, we talked about clubs and getting people into clubs. what do you think some of the biggest barriers are that exist preventing people from joining clubs? Because we've done some episodes where we've talked about there's almost like this exclusivity. Even just the word club can be a problem for some people, that they might not feel welcome into it. But like, what do you think are some of the biggest barriers that are holding people back from going to clubs?
Yeah, I mean the name club, that right off the hop. I mean, I just say it because I'm used to saying it for 30 years now, but it is terrible. It should never be called that. But a lot of places are changing for sure. But I mean, beyond that, I mean, now there's we're putting a whole different lens on that, and from the diversity aspect. But even the diversity stuff aside, curling clubs do a terrible job of marketing themselves. And many of them don't have good, solid business sense behind their operations. I mean, they're this is where they lean back towards being a club again. They just kind of try to survive for their members, and then every 10 years or so there's an equipment crisis, and we have to raise $100,000 just to keep the place alive, and people have to dig in and donate time or do things, and it doesn't need to be that way. But I think better business plans are required in most cases, and much more marketing. I mean, clubs tend to be afraid to invest in things. They see marketing as a cost. They don't see it as an investment, and it is really not hard this day and age to get some very cheap and effective marketing out there via social media. It's really not that hard.
Yeah, and I think that another thing that I frequently think about is that clubs, they shut down in the summer and then that's it. Like, I'm thinking, clubs have parking lots. They could do things that bring community members in. You could set something up like this outside the club in the summer, have a barbecue, invite people in, try the sport. But the decisions that so many clubs make to just shut the building and not try to generate revenue in the summer, I find that kind of a problem too. And these types of things, whether it's Rocks and Rings specifically or just general floor curling, these are ways that clubs can maintain an active presence in the community all 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to be said about community involvement. I mean, even if it has nothing to do with the actual ice, just allowing groups to come in and use the space and, become aware that the facility is there. And you're just going to find that the awareness of the place is way higher, which is going to result in people, just organically becoming curlers in the future because suddenly they know it's there. I mean, my curling club, I'm on the board of the Royal Canadian Curling Club at Queen and Broadview here in Toronto, and a lot of people don't even know it's there. You can't see it right from the road, and so I know people that live in the area and didn't even realize there's a curling club there. So now it has a unique problem in that we're basically full to capacity, but that's not always going to be the case, and so they're more awareness is never a bad thing. I mean, the other thing I'd like to add to that too actually is that clubs are for the most part are using a very antiquated system that is so member focused, and I think we need to get away from that. I mean, leagues and membership should be a nice baseline at the club, but it shouldn't dominate the club's programming. I mean, you get people want to go bowling. They call a bowling alley, they book a lane, and they go. And the same thing happens with curling. But curling clubs, we just kind of laugh at these people and go, no, you can't do that. Right. Well, why not? We're trying to force them to buy our product versus give them the product that they want. You know what I mean? So there's challenges there, and hopefully we're trying to change that with some of the consulting work that we do as well.
Yeah, it's one of these things that I've said, I think I've said this on the show, but it's something I believe that the current situation, we'll see what happens in the fall with clubs. I know Curling Geek is keeping track of clubs that have announced that they're going to open versus clubs that have announced that they're not going to open. But I do think there will be some enterprising individuals at curling facilities across the country that try to implement new business models this year out of necessity that will carry forward and start to change the business model of clubs across the country.
Oh, yeah. I mean, nobody asked for this pandemic, but at the same time, I think there could be a lot of opportunity that comes out of this. It's not just negativity here. I don't think clubs do have an opportunity to change things up, where they might lose some members here or there. They may lose a league here or there, but that's going to give them the ability going forward to use those time slots more effectively. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm also wondering, just in general, let's put the pandemic aside for as much as that's possible in this moment in time. But where do you think the sport is in terms of its overall health in the country? You've been involved in a long time, bringing in new players and educational programs. Just what do you think the state of curling is in Canada in 2020?
Curling is in a fantastic position in my opinion. I mean, you always hear the doom and gloom out there and the naysayers, but I think that's just a knee-jerk reaction that they're trained to give and have always been trained to give. But curling is in a great position, and yes, I know some smaller towns and rural areas where we'll say our curling clubs are closing, we're losing curlers, but relatively speaking, I mean, that's happening across the board, and that's urban migration, and that's all these things. But if you put curling up against any other sport, I think Curling Canada has done a great job. They have a way better youth development system right from that introductory touch, like Rocks and Rings, than most other sports do. You're also seeing a lot of people going away from the physical and more violent sports. So you're seeing people not wanting to put their kids with all the issues now with concussions and stuff like that, and you're seeing them not want to go into hockey or football as much, and curling is a great alternative to that. So I would challenge anyone that curling is not in a bad position at all right now. It's actually in a great position compared to most sport in Canada.
And Chad, how to build on that a little bit, Rocks and Rings is available, as you said, in every province and territory in Canada.
Yes, you can. We've got almost all of the map covered. Territories are usually more of a we do events here and there type thing, but most of the country can just contact us at any time and book a session.
And so what then is the next step for the Rocks and Rings program? Do you see hiring more employees to deliver it on a more frequent basis, expanding out the program to more than one day? What do you see?
Yeah, that's already starting to happen. I mean, we've got, for instance, the GTA, I think in Calgary, we've actually got 2 instructors in those regions now, and they work every single day pretty much during the school year. So the expansion is there. We keep doing that. We just keep learning and figuring out better ways to market the program. And our retention rate has been really, really high in terms of schools returning after having it for a year. And our biggest challenge is that, after a few years, a lot of them come to us and say, we've done this 3 or 4 years in a row. We're going to take a year off and come back next year. So we've been constantly evolving. We've created, sub programs. We've created the Rocks and Rings tournaments program, which is more about gameplay and instead of the intro. And so we just keep evolving and doing a better job of marketing, I think, to just keep it growing so that we don't lose anyone out of boredom or anything like that. It's the repetitive touches that are part of the long-term goal of getting people into, or getting kids into curling. We just we want it to be, we don't want it to be that weird thing that nobody does, that none of their friends do. We want it to become a normal gym activity like anything else that they regularly do.
Right.
Yeah. That definitely makes it easier, right, when you have friends who are doing it too, right? If you already have a connection going to the curling club with you, it does make it a little easier. There's no question about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Curling Canada has told us years ago that, several people there have told us the same thing, that they made the biggest mistake they ever made was back, I think it was in the 70s, maybe late 60s, when curling used to be a school sport. And then they took the focus, they took it away from the schools and basically put it into the clubs. So junior curling became more of a club-led thing than a school-led thing. And they'll tell you that was the biggest mistake they made, because now you're waiting for people to come to you instead of the outreach. So, yeah.
Now we've talked pretty much only about Canada, but I do know that there is now she's Canadian, but a Canadian who lives in Mexico who has an interest in getting her kids in curling and thinks that this sort of thing is the best way. So does the program run internationally?
It does and it doesn't. It doesn't run in its true sense, of Rocks and Rings, what we do in Canada, and a lot of that just comes down to there's no other countries that have the resources when it comes to curling that we do. But we work with a lot of different countries. I am actually really good friends with the Curling Mexico folks. We helped them get their official certification with the WCF years ago, and so we've been working with them. So a lot of these countries, they'll have the equipment. They'll have guidance from us on how to use it, and they'll do things like that, but they don't actually have the full-blown Rocks and Rings program. If there is someone in Mexico that wants to play, then absolutely I want to talk to them. We have the first rink that I'm personally a part of that is opening in Mexico City, and it's actually it would have been open by now if it wasn't for this whole COVID mess. So things are happening.
Oh, that's really exciting. So if people are interested in the program and bringing it into their schools, where can they go? What is the process, and how do they get it? How do they get it going?
So here in Canada, best thing is go to rocksandrings.com. And it's spelled out there, whatever you need to do. I mean, most of it is targeted towards teachers, but we also have a very successful new program that we call Adopt a School, where people that are just interested in, whether they might be just interested in having it at a school near their club, or maybe where their child or grandchild goes to school, they want to see it there, and they can adopt a school and get it in there that way too.
All right, terrific. And on Twitter, at Rocks and Rings, too, to follow all the developments.
I'm going to have to take your word. I can't remember.
Okay,
We have different handles across different social media platforms, but I think that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. So follow the Rocks and Rings program. It's one of those things where we see the commercials during the Scotties and the Brier all the time, but it's nice to get a better sense of what it's all about and the role it's playing in getting young people into the sport and trying to diversify the sport. So Chad McMullen, we really appreciate you taking the time for joining us today.
No problem, guys. Thanks for having me.
And there you have it, our discussion with Chad McMullen. Of course, we thank him for his time. Scott, I thought that was really good. Really great insights from Chad in the origins of the program. I'm very impressed with the buy-through rate of once people are in the clubs. And it's one of these things where, as we talked about towards the end, you can't really take a curling club or a curling facility to people. For the actual getting on the ice experience, right? It's very tied to that place. But the more we can do to reach out to people, that will help grow the sport and ensure that clubs are healthy into the future.
Yeah, for sure. And to do it in all kinds of communities, right? Not just communities that have a curling club.
Yeah,
for
maybe
sure. There is none in somewhere, and at least the game is being introduced. I also found, Sean, going to the Rocks and Rings website is very beneficial, and following them on Twitter too, because they just tweeted a link to a delicious looking chocolate chip cookies recipe.
Yeah, ain't nothing wrong with that.
In conjunction with their partnership with the egg farmers. So I know what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, so definitely do check out rocksandrings.com, and especially if you have kids and want to bring the program to the school or support bringing the program to other schools. It's just, as we talked about in the show, I think this is one of those great programs that will help grow the sport and help to diversify the sport by showing off how much fun the sport can truly be. Like, curling is a lot of fun, and these sorts of things will help demonstrate that. And certainly in the commercials where you have Caitlin Laws screaming with the kids, hurry and sweep and all that kind of stuff, it seems like a good time, and the sort of thing that it can't hurt, certainly, in growing the sport.
My favorite part of that ad is the sort of side eye that Caitlin gives to the girl that's screaming so much louder than her, and she's kind of like, whoa, right on.
Yeah. Wait, time out. I'm the 2-time gold medalist. You don't outshine me.
You are better at screaming than me. Yes, it's true.
So definitely check that out, and that'll do it though for this week's episode. Thank you everybody for listening. please do subscribe to the show wherever it is you get your podcasts. If you haven't yet, give us the likes and the ratings, the comments, all that stuff helps the show grow, helps other people find the show as well. If you want to follow along with everything going on, we're on Instagram and Twitter at Game of Stones Pod. You can find Scott at Scott Likes TV. I'm at the Sean Graham. And of course, head on over to GameOfStonesPod.com for all the episodes, but also the merch. We have t-shirts, the Game of Stones t-shirt. All proceeds from the sales go to Food Banks Canada. So everything is for that. In the midst of the pandemic, we wanted to do something to help out in whatever small way we could. And of course, if you don't want a t-shirt and want to donate to Food Banks Canada or your local food bank, you're not going to get any argument from us, Scott.
Absolutely. Always down to donate to a good cause.
Also, be sure to join us on Monday afternoons on Facebook Live with the guys from Rocks Across the Pond. We're going live at 5 Eastern each Monday talking about whatever. And as always, if we get to 1,000 live people, we will force Scott to get a tattoo.
Do your worst, folks. Do your worst.
So you can check that out. Also on our Facebook page, if you're interested and you missed it, we do have video of the roundtable that we did last week with Kerry Galusha and Andrew Paris talking about diversity in curling, as well as our first roundtable that we had with Portia Stevenson, Arya Moore, and Jason Chang, where we were talking about diversity. So all of that is on the Facebook page, so do check it out over there. So we will be back with you again next week, but until then, keep those brooms on the ice and don't dump that intern.
Make the final.